In the heart of Oklahoma, beneath the quiet plains, lay a secret worth millions: oil. But what began as unimaginable wealth for the Osage Nation soon turned into a nightmare. Mysterious murders, poisoned families, and a chilling conspiracy driven by greed. This is the true story of betrayal and bloodshed, where justice fought against the shadows. Stay with us as we uncover one of America's darkest untold secrets, the Osage Reign of Terror. Welcome back to Behind Closed Files, where we delve into the most chilling and baffling cases. The Osage Murders. In the early 1900s, a seemingly barren land in northeastern Oklahoma held a secret. Beneath the dry red soil lay a treasure more valuable than gold: oil. And it was this black gold that would bring both unimaginable wealth and untold tragedy to the people who lived there: the Osage Nation. The Osage people had been forced onto this land by the U.S. government years earlier. At the time, the land seemed worthless. But soon, prospectors and oil companies arrived, eager to tap into the vast oil reserves beneath the Osage Reservation. Under U.S. law, the Osage retained the rights to the oil on their land. This meant that every Osage person, man, woman, and child, was entitled to a share of the profits from the oil extracted from their land. These payments were known as head rights. Before long, the Osage people were some of the richest individuals in the world. They built mansions, drove expensive cars, and sent their children to study in Europe. But their newfound wealth caught the attention of outsiders, people with greed in their hearts, willing to go to any lengths to take that wealth for themselves. By the 1920s, the Osage Nation was under attack, not from outside invaders, but from a far more insidious enemy. Osage people began to die, one by one, often under mysterious circumstances. The first death was that of Anna Brown, a young Osage woman who was found shot to death in May of 1921. Her family was devastated, but her death was just the beginning. Weeks later, Lizzie Q, Anna's mother, died of a mysterious illness, followed by the sudden deaths of her relatives. One by one, Osage families were wiped out, and their wealth transferred to others, often white settlers who had been appointed as guardians by the government. But no one seemed interested in investigating these deaths, and the local authorities were either corrupt or too afraid to pursue the cases. This was no random series of deaths. It was a systematic and calculated plot, a dark conspiracy designed to wipe out the Osage people and steal their oil money. At the center of this horrific conspiracy was a man named William Hale, a powerful and wealthy cattleman who had built a fortune in Osage County. Hale was well-liked and respected by many, but behind his charismatic smile hid a ruthless man with a sinister plan. Hale saw the wealth of the Osage people and knew that if he could eliminate them, he could claim their head rights. And so, he set his plan in motion. Hale persuaded his nephew, Ernest Burkhart, to marry an Osage woman named Molly Burkhart. Through this marriage, Hale sought to gain access to Molly's family wealth. But the scheme didn't end there. Hale systematically plotted the deaths of Molly's family members. Molly's sister, Rita Smith, was killed when her home was blown up in the middle of the night. Molly's other sister, Anna, had been murdered the year before. Hale even arranged the poisoning of Molly's mother, Lizzie Q. Each death brought Hale closer to inheriting the family's oil fortune. Molly, devastated by the loss of her entire family, was now surrounded by people she could no longer trust. She had no idea that the man behind her family's murders was her own husband's uncle. And worst of all, she didn't know she was next. The Osage people, terrified and grieving, turned to the U.S. government for help. They sent pleas for justice, begging for someone to investigate the deaths. Finally, in 1923, the federal government responded. A new investigative force, the Bureau of Investigation, later known as the FBI, was tasked with looking into the Osage murders. At the time, it was led by a young and ambitious man named J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover assigned a former Texas Ranger named Tom White to lead the investigation. White and his team arrived in Osage County, undercover and determined to get to the bottom of the murders. What they uncovered was far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. White's investigation revealed a massive conspiracy involving numerous people, all tied to William Hale. Local officials had been bribed to turn a blind eye. and doctors had falsified death certificates to cover up poisonings and murders. White and his team slowly pieced together the truth, using covert operations and wiretaps to catch the conspirators in the act. Finally, in 1926, William Hale, Ernest Burkhart, and their accomplices were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. During the trial, the full extent of their crimes was revealed. Hale had orchestrated the deaths of at least 24 Osage people, though many believe the true number was much higher. Hale, Burkhart, and others involved in the conspiracy were convicted, but many others who had profited from the deaths of the Osage were never brought to justice. The Osage Murders, also known as the Osage Reign of Terror, remains one of the darkest chapters in American history. Over a span of a few short years, dozens of Osage men, women, and children were brutally murdered by those who sought to steal their wealth. The system of guardianship, which was supposed to protect the Osage, had instead become a tool for their exploitation and destruction. Though justice was eventually served in part, the scars left on the Osage people were deep. Families were torn apart, and trust in both local authorities and the federal government was shattered. It was a devastating reminder of the racism, greed, and violence that Native Americans had faced for generations. Today, the story of the Osage Murders is remembered as a cautionary tale, a story of how unchecked greed and systemic racism can lead to unspeakable tragedy. The Osage people, once the wealthiest in the world, paid the ultimate price for their prosperity. As the investigation came to an end, the Osage Nation began the slow process of rebuilding. They fought for justice, for recognition of the horrors they endured, and for control over their own destiny. The murders left an indelible mark on their history, but the resilience of the Osage people remains a powerful testament to their strength. And even now, nearly a century later, the story of the Osage Reign of Terror continues to resonate, a reminder of the devastating consequences of greed and the resilience of a people determined to survive.